Live. Hey everyone, Andreas, your garden coordinator here, and this is going to be one of the most interesting Live in the Wellness gardens yet. Really excited for this one, and you can see that we have already gotten started right here. But here is Nelly. Hi guys. And while we're getting ready and while people are joining, let's take a quick tour. Take a look at this awesome bed right here. These beans are beginning to produce.
We got some right here.
Yep, right here. There we are. Beans in November. Excellent. Very exciting. We're going to donate a lot of beans to the food pantry. The rest of the garden looks great. This sage is really coming back right here. Even a lot of our tropicals are still going, which is cool. Pigeon pea. We did cut back the tithonia last week, and it's already resprouting quite vigorously. Sugarcane looks great. Here's our new planting right here. Mushroom bed right there. Remember when we did the mushroom bed? We talked about mulching. Check it out. We've already got lots of mycelium. Those are our mushrooms right there. And I would say in the spring we're probably going to get some mushrooms, but we're going to leave these guys alone for now. And here's the new bed that we sowed. New lettuces look great. We've got some of the claytonia popping up. Spinach is beginning to germinate. And the arugula is over there. The arugula has quite large seedlings compared to the others. And we can see we've got plenty of arugula coming up. It's going to be almost time to thin these. Very exciting. Transplants look good. Everything looks fantastic. But now that people have joined, I think we can actually get started. We're going to talk about establishing native plants today. Growing native plants is probably one of the most important and also one of the most beneficial things that you could do for your garden. Because not only are we losing our native plant communities at a staggering rate, it is estimated that we will lose, I think, around 3,500 California native species out of the 6,000 that we have by 2040, possibly earlier. So in order to preserve those native genetics, we want to plant native plants in our gardens. And not only that, native plants are some of the best plants ever for attracting beneficial insects. And I've seen this in practice. I have seen how many of the good guys that native plants can bring into our garden and how great they are at attracting pollinators, predators, parasitoids. And they're beautiful as well. And some of them are even edible and have medicinal qualities. I mean, you can find a use for pretty much any native plant, but certain ones are very medicinal and are used for a lot of things. Who can plant here? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Deb. I mean, we all can plant native plants, but some of the ones that we'll be planting today. So we have some holes that are still being prepped, and I'll explain why. But here we have California buckwheat, or Eriogonum fasciculatum. This is one of the keystone native plants in the San Fernando Valley. Another one that's very important, narrowleaf milkweed. This is a native pioneer plant, which means it helps to reestablish ecosystems, and it is the most important food plant here for the threatened monarch butterfly. Here we have black sage. This is a very fragrant native sage. We have, I believe, 26 native sages in California. We're going to be planting 2 of them today. Black sage is one of the most common ones around here. Another one that we have is white sage, Salvia Apiana. This one is a very sacred plant for many indigenous groups, and it has been traditionally used for smudging. Very trendy thing nowadays. Here we have more milkweed, and then we have the Mexican elderberry. This one is this one produces an edible fruit that also has medicinal qualities. The flowers can also be eaten, and they are said to help with your immune system. So yeah, you only want to eat the flowers and the bright berries on that one because the rest of the plant is poisonous, but very useful plant nonetheless. So yeah, who can come here and plant in the garden? Just staff of the interns and of the Magrum Center for right now due to COVID restrictions. But we will be hopefully opening the garden up again in spring semester, and there will be volunteer opportunities, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, this is narrowleaf milkweed. Narrowleaf milkweed, Asclepius fasicularis. This is our most common native milkweed here in the San Fernando Valley. You will find it growing wild if you know where to look. It prefers more disturbed sites. I've seen it growing on hiking trails, believe it or not. But this is an extremely important plant for monarch butterflies, and also one of the best plants for attracting beneficial insects to your garden. This one is great for attracting ladybugs, hoverflies, parasitoid wasps, which are tiny little wasps that will infect aphids with their larvae and kill them. So a great thing to plant. And then yeah, so we're going to start with our transplants. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sow in a mix of, I guess you could call it a micro prairie mix. And so what that basically is we're going to be sowing in a seed mix that is designed after a native bunchgrass ecosystem. And native bunchgrass ecosystems are our most endangered ecosystems in the entire state. 99% of them has been destroyed, but we still have many of the species, and they're actually one of the easiest ecosystems to establish in your garden. You kind of have to go through certain procedures for, establishing this other ecosystem that we're pulling plants from here, the coastal sage scrub ecosystem, and we'll describe what those are in a minute. But with native bunchgrass ecosystems, you basically just have to sow your seeds, and you'll end up with a mix of grasses and very, very beautiful wildflowers that reseed themselves and come back every year. So site preparation. Let's talk about site preparation, what we did here. So we peeled back the weed cloth. We don't want to be putting soil over weed cloth ideally we don't want to be growing our native plants in raised beds either, because our California native plants are very deep rooted. That's how they are so drought tolerant. So even one of those little native bunch grasses that you see, they might get to 3 feet tall, 5 feet tall. Their root systems can go down 20 feet. So we want to make sure that we don't have any weed cloth down so that they can extend their root systems as deep as they would prefer to go. And this will allow them to access subsurface water reserves. Another way we can encourage transplants to extend their root systems deep down and fully develop the root systems is by digging these holes before we transplant. So we'll dig our holes for the transplants, and then what we'll do is fill them up with water and allow them to drain for at least 4 to 5 times. And this establishes groundwater reserves in the planting site, so that the native plants are encouraged to extend their root systems deep into the soil and out. Therefore, those root systems will be fully developed, and they'll be able to be resilient in the face of drought, in the face of heat, and in the face of other environmental stressors. So that's what we did. We were not able to do it 4 to 5 times. We were able to fill these holes up about 3 to 4 times, but that's still going to be helpful in establishing these plants. So what we're going to do is we're going to establish the perennials first, the shrubs. So let's start over here with the buckwheat, Eriogonum fasciculatum. I'm going to lower this right here. Do you mind getting the shovel in, Nelly?
Big one, or you want the small?
Let's get the small one, the little trowels. Native buckwheat right here. This one was donated. When it comes to buying native plants from a nursery, just keep in mind that they may not be using local seed varieties. So try and find a plant that's as local to your area as possible. And maybe if you're, and this even applies to individual species. Like for example, this buckwheat right here can be found all across Southern California. But the California native buckwheat that grows near the coast, as opposed to in the valley, may be adapted to a different set of conditions, because we do live in because these are 2 very different microclimates. We get a lot warmer temperatures here. So look for a buckwheat specimen that is from your area if possible. We're not going to be covering how to collect seeds from the wild this time. I don't want to encourage seed poaching, and I don't feel qualified to talk about that. But that's something that you can do as well. If you want to learn about that, I recommend taking a native hummingbirds class on Instagram, Nicholas Hummingbird. That is _native_hummingbird. That is his Instagram handle. So definitely take his class on that if that's what you're interested in doing. But for today, for these shrubs, we have transplants. So what we're going to do is very gently, we're going to place the pot in here and see how much soil we need to backfill in. So we do need to backfill in some of the soil so that the transplant is sitting at level with the soil around it. So we're going to bring some of the soil back in. And the soil has improved in friability a lot now that we've moistened it up as well. So the native plants are really going to be able to sink their roots in there. We want to make sure that it's a little bit compacted so that it doesn't, we don't want to compact it too much, but just a little bit, just firm it up a bit. So that the soil level doesn't drop after we backfill the hole. And let's see now. We're getting closer. So we'll plant these guys. And after I demonstrate this, Nelly, in fact, you can begin planting the other ones if you'd like.
Yeah.
So we're gonna, that's perfect. So we're gonna take this one out of the pot now. So I like to invert the pot or tilt the pot on the side. Squeeze very gently. You want to handle these plants with care. Squeeze very gently, just to loosen it. Hold it by the crown, right there. Maybe even grip the soil and then just gently pull it out. So this plant is a little bit root bound. We can see the roots are circling around the bottom, so very gently. We want to tease the roots out, just like that. Pull them apart gently and place it in. And so we can see that this plant sort of has like a dominant shoot that goes that way. We want to point the dominant shoot out towards where it's growing, maybe even right here, because the sun is going to come from that way. We don't want this plant to grow into the fence. We want it to grow towards the sun and out from the fence. So we're going to point it diagonally right there. And later on, if it is not growing in the right direction, we can correct that by pruning. Then we're just going to bring the soil back around here. Just like so. Make sure to keep it at soil level. We're going to firm it up. And then we want, along the edges, we want to kind of build this basin, this berm. Just take soil from the edges. You can see, like, now we have all this subsurface water around here because we watered the holes several times. And that's really going to encourage the native plants to develop a strong, vigorous root system that spreads downwards and in all directions, and radiates in all directions from around the plant. That will allow this plant to be resilient. We want to grow resilient plants, not weak plants that will die after a couple of years. That's why a lot of people who try growing native plants get discouraged, because they don't use techniques like this that help these native plants establish properly as they would in a more wild situation. You know, as I always like to say, do as nature does. Nature is a self-correcting, self-regulating, self-designed system. It is a complex dynamic system that has evolved over 4 billion years. And so we have 4 billion years of research and development in nature. And for California's ecosystem in particular, we have tens of thousands of years of research and development. So we're going to observe how things work in a natural setting and replicate that as best we can. And we'll talk about how to do that with seeds a little bit later. So there we go. Our buckwheat is now planted. We have a nice planting site, a nice little basin. And just want to make sure that this basin is stable. Maybe loosen up some of the soil right here. We're gonna have to loosen up more of the soil to get the wildflower seeds in, but just loosen it up, build it up as best you can. I'd say a couple inches high is good as these plants get established, and probably, you know, at least to the drip line, so at least to the shoot that reaches the furthest out is probably as wide you want to go. I'd probably go a couple inches wider than that. Yeah. So a big thanks to my friend Lucy, who volunteers with Hahamongna Nursery, and Hahamongna Nursery for making these plants available to us. One great nursery you can get native plants from if you're looking to do that. You can also check out the Theodore Payne Foundation. I'm wearing one of their masks. They offer a very wide selection of native plants and seeds. I always recommend doing native plants from seed if you can, but if you have transplants, you can use transplants. Just make sure that you get them established properly, like so. So there we are. Our buckwheat is established. Do you feel comfortable getting the other ones in now, Nelly?
Yeah.
Do you want to do one of the milkweeds right there?
Sure.
And I'll do the black sage.
Okay.
Yep, so narrow leaf milkweed, same procedure. So then after we're done with all these, we're gonna water them in. So we have this whole area that's about 48 square feet for these native plants. And I would recommend doing a larger space if you can, but this is along the edge of the garden, right next to the rosemary. So another important thing to consider with native plants is that they don't like being watered in the summer at all. Many of them don't. there are exceptions. It depends on what ecosystem the plant is from. So think about water regimes in California and how water flows across our landscape and how water availability and moisture levels change depending on where you are in the landscape. And that's going to depend on topography. That's going to depend on the orientation of the slope in relation to the path of the sun across the sky. That's going to depend on, you know, whether or not you are close to any kind of water source, whether that be a lake, river, or stream. So, as we all know, you know, people like to say, you know, we don't get rain in California, but we do. We actually do have a natural rainfall regime, and things may be a bit weird right now due to climate change because our rainfall patterns are becoming more and more sporadic and more and more erratic. But they're not actually going to, like, the amount of rainfall we get is not actually going to change that much. It's just going to become more erratic. But our natural rainfall regime is wet winters and dry summers. We get most of our rain between the months of November and March. I'm going to bring in more soil right here. And that's our wet season. We have a winter wet season. So therefore, a lot of our native plants, you know, black sage being one of them, is adapted to moist conditions in the winter and early spring and drier conditions for the rest of the year. And once you get into the summer, you don't really even want to water native plants at all. And, you know, in fact, when it comes to native plants, you don't need to water them really once they're established. They will do just fine on their own, provided you establish them properly. That being said, you know, if you are going to water your native plants, some people decide to water their native plants. So the reason is, you know, they want to keep them, you know, looking more lush and green throughout a larger portion of the year, because many of our native plants are also summer dormant. They will dry up during the summer and look really dead, but they are alive and they will come back once the rain comes. But you can extend this with infrequent deep waterings in the summer. But if you're going to do that, you know, just know how much water the individual plant can tolerate, because it differs. So when it comes to plants that are from really dry areas, like this black sage here, black sage prefers south-facing slopes in the sage scrub plant community, the coastal sage scrub plant community. Coastal sage scrub is one of the more arid ecosystems in coastal California, not only because it is found in a region that at large contains lower rainfall. It is found at lower elevations in Southern California. The lower the elevation, generally speaking, the lower the rainfall. But it's found on south-facing slopes, and south-facing slopes are driest slope, as opposed to north, which is the most moist, and west and east, which are both moister than south-facing slopes. So this plant is probably not going to tolerate a lot of water during the summer, so just keep that in mind. And so what you want to do then is not only lay off the watering in the summer for the most part, but also plant it away from any areas that are irrigated. So this rosemary, I checked this rosemary hedge and it does not appear to be irrigated. So this is a good spot for a lot of our native plants for that reason, because they're not going to be getting subsurface water flows. What could happen if many native plants become too moist during the summer, if the root systems become too moist, is the roots will actually rot and the plants will die. And this is one of the leading causes of death for native plants, is people overwater them and they end up getting root rot and dying during the summer when they're not supposed to be getting much water at all. There's our black sage. Looks great, Anelli. That's perfect. Maybe a couple adjustments, but that's great. So there we are. I'm going to berm that one up now. Careful not to mess up these holes that I have all around. But we'll berm these up. Do you want to move on to the next one?
Sure.
Yeah, you could do the milkweed if you want again.
Okay.
Up to you. Same procedure for all of these, because yeah, we already moistened the holes, so we're good on that end. And again, bury them. Oh, this one came off. Yeah, see this came off on accident. It'll be fine. If these are not successful, then we will germinate more seeds and make more transplants and replant them. And we'll be good. We want to make sure that we properly establish this planting, because these transplants did sit around for a while. I haven't been able to plant them. I wanted to wait until it began to cool off a bit, and we're getting to that point now. Apparently you can establish native plants year-round if you use this technique where you water the holes, but it may still be easier to do it during cooler parts of the year, where there's not as much heat, not as much sunlight. It'll be a less stressful situation for the native plants to establish themselves in. So there we go. There's our black sage, Salvia Milifera. This is a great plant for attracting bees, hummingbirds, butterflies, all kinds of things. Fantastic to bring wildlife into your garden and to create crucial habitat that is being lost at an astounding rate. So there we go. There's our black sage. Any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments at any time. Looking good on the milkweed. So here's our white sage. White sage is regarded as a sacred plant by many indigenous cultures. And it is a gorgeous plant as well. That grows to be quite large and attracts lots. Once again, the sages attract lots of bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. So we've got a nice hole prep for this one. Perfect. And so after this, we will be doing seeds as well. We're going to demonstrate how to sow native wildflower seeds and grass seeds. So when it comes to how this planting was designed, so this is modeled after, for the most part, the coastal sage scrub ecosystem on a south-facing slope, because this is a site that is exposed to full sun. For sites that are exposed to full sun, you're going to mostly want plants that are from south-facing slopes, or that are indigenous to the south-facing slopes of the coastal sage scrub ecosystem. The coastal sage scrub ecosystem is present at lower elevations along the coastal strip of Southern California. And those are the plants that you're going to want to use. If you're on a north-facing slope or have a shadier spot, use plants that are found on north-facing slopes. All right, there we are. Let's build up that berm. I think we're going to need to re-loosen some of the soil here for the wildflowers, because it's quite compacted. But that's okay, we'll do it. So build up that berm. Yeah, but yeah, as far as the planting was designed, we have paired together a native bunchgrass ecosystem with a coastal sage scrub ecosystem, because oftentimes you will find bunchgrass ecosystems, in a more natural setting, in a mosaic with coastal sage scrub, and a lot of these bunchgrass prairie species actually help coastal sage scrub regenerate after a disturbance, especially after fires. And so we're going to be using this sort of native micro prairie mix to help condition the soil for these coastal sage scrub shrubs and support them as they establish and get developed. And eventually, naturally, these coastal sage scrub plants will fill in, and the bunchgrass prairie species will begin to cycle out. They will still be present because they will reseed themselves and establish a seed bank, and we will still see them coming up as they please. But the coastal sage scrub species are quite large shrubs, so they will begin to take over. White sage is actually one of the hardiest coastal sage scrub plants and one of the fastest growing. Very rapid grower. So this will be great here. It'll fill out really quickly.
How long does it take to grow?
It'll be fantastic. What's that?
So how long does it take to grow?
This one will probably be yay high, like 3 or 4 feet high by the end of the year if we're lucky. I mean, I don't know entirely. I'm kind of guessing because I've never seen how fast it actually grows, but it's supposed to grow fast. This is my first time planting this one in particular. But you know, I've planted others. I've planted milkweeds. I've planted wildflowers. I got a lot of good information from people who in the native plant world about how these plants tend to grow. So, that one drained out already?
I didn't look like it.
Wow, that was fast. So we'll fill it up again.
All of them, yeah. The ones that still need to drain out are just the two middle ones.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. It's probably because we have more drainage around the rosemary, because the rosemary roots probably broke up and structured the soil a bit. Okay. How does this one look? Looks good?
Yeah.
That one looks good too. So, do you want to do the elderberry while I begin breaking up the soil?
Sure.
Yes, white sage does have medicinal properties. I'm not sure exactly what those are, but I do know that it's used for smudging. This is what is used for smudging. This is that exact plant. And there's been a lot of controversy about its use for smudging by people because, not only because it's considered cultural appropriation, but because this has caused a lot of white sage to be poached from the wild, and it's very quickly becoming an endangered plant. But, you know, it is quite common and it's easy to grow. I personally wouldn't, you know, appropriate these practices. It's not something I condone at all. But, you know, if you must use white sage for anything, grow it. And as for black sage, I believe I've heard that black sage makes a substitute for regular sage in cooking, and a very delicious one at that. So that may be something worth exploring if you like to use sage in cooking, is growing some black sage and using it as a substitute for the non-native European sage that most people would grow in their gardens. You know, we have so many native sages in California that have very unique fragrances and you know, appearances. And why not use a native sage for your cooking, you know, instead of growing a non-native sage that's going to require more care and is not going to provide as much value to the local ecosystem. So I'm going to get my digging bar, and since we're digging through highly compacted native soil, I want to show you guys this tool that I like to use. I brought it from home in order to break up the soil. And we just want to break up the surface so that the wildflower seeds have an opportunity to germinate correctly. Because if the soil is compacted, they're going to have a hard time establishing their root systems. But you know, if they're able to germinate and begin growing, and once the rains come and the soil starts to soften up, then they should be just fine. And we'll keep watering this area after we've gotten all of our seeds and plants in order to ensure that the soil remains moist and friable enough for all the seedlings to get their roots down in there. So I'll demonstrate how to break up the soil with this tool. So I didn't talk about the elderberry at all, and as far as its requirements and why we're putting it at that location. So elderberry is found in many ecosystems and situations throughout California, but it prefers sites where there's lots of subsurface moisture. So that's why we're placing it next to the raised vegetable bed, which is watered by drip irrigation on a regular basis, because this is going to create, on some level, at least a certain amount of subsurface moisture in the soil that's going to persist throughout the year. Therefore, this is a good location for the elderberry. You know, you want to take into consideration the hydrology of your site when you're planting native plants once again, in order to ensure that they're the most successful that they can be. And, you know, just understand, you know, that you want to put native plants in a situation in your garden that is similar to where they would grow in the wild. There are some native plants that can grow with regular year-round irrigation, And these are mostly plants that are native to the riparian zones. That is zones near streams, rivers, lakes, and ponds. California mugwort being one of them. I grow California mugwort alongside my vegetables. So I have this digging bar here. It's quite a hefty tool. It's 20 pounds. And you just sort of jam it into the soil repeatedly to break up compaction. I like to jam it, twist. Jam it, twist. This will help to get rid of that compaction. So after we're done there, I'm going to demonstrate how to mulch the nests. Anelli. I like to call planting sites for plants nests because you're preparing a sort of like, you know, an environment where they can grow up, a hospitable environment where we can baby them. So it's a nest. You know, we as humans can be a beneficial part of the ecosystems around here too. We're not inherently destructive. And one of the ways that we can do that is provide ideal conditions for the native plants that we want to grow to establish themselves so that they can be more successful and grow into stronger plants that they might in a wild situation. We actually can improve the ecosystems around us with right action. So let's move this. So right now we're breaking up the soil in preparation for the wildflowers and grasses. We just want to make sure that we're not too compacted. So I'll do a pass with this right here. This iron digging bar weighs 20 pounds. This is quite the workout. But it's definitely well worth it if you're trying to establish native wildflowers and grasses. So again, the native wildflower and grass mix, or micro prairie mix that we're going to be sowing around these shrubs that are native to the coastal sage scrub ecosystem, are going to help support them as they establish. They're going to cover the soil, begin breaking up the soil, help make nutrients available, begin attracting and establishing the populations of insects that are native to this ecosystem. And they're going to be present on some level at all times. And they're going to help to establish a seed bank. Because eventually, you know, what we want to do is once these plants get overgrown, we're going to prune them very heavily. And when we do that, that's going to open up space again for these bunch grasses and wildflowers to reestablish themselves. And so that way, you know, we're managing this ecosystem on a kind of cycle. You know, we're sort of like replicating the cycles of disturbance and reestablishment that occur in nature. And this is how we can maximize the ecological benefit that we receive from this planting. Oh boy. Sounds like we have somebody who is trimming the bushes at an inopportune time. Well, I'll just make sure to stay close to the microphone then and raise my voice so that you guys can hear me over the sound of the weed whacker. But we're just gonna keep breaking up this soil, and then we're gonna come in with another tool and just sort of separate these clods of dirt so that we have a more uniform we have a more uniform particle size, because we don't want these clods of dirt here because they're going to inhibit the germination of the native wildflowers and grasses. As we can see, even with this this 20-pound iron digging bar, I can only get in to the topsoil maybe an inch or two. And this is going to improve once the soil becomes remoistened again, but we need to sow our seeds first and then water, because it's the water that's going to stimulate the germination of most of these wildflower and grass seeds. So when it comes to how seeds get germinated in a native situation, then we're going to want to understand how the dormancy of the seeds are broken in a natural environment. So I'll talk about that in a moment as well once we get to our seeds. Yeah, so this is right here, Deb, this is narrowleaf milkweed. Asclepius Fasicularis. So this is our most common native milkweed in Southern California. I will type the botanical name in the chat so that you know exactly what plant I'm talking about. Definitely plant this one from transplants right now. Right now is peak native planting season, but you can also start narrowleaf milkweed from seeds from, I would say, April all the way until July, maybe even August. So Asclepius fascicularis is our native milkweed, the most important milkweed in Southern California. Another thing to mention about milkweed is if you're right up next to the coast, don't bother growing it. Monarch butterflies overwinter in mild coastal climates. They don't reproduce in mild coastal climates. So this milkweed is important for the monarch butterfly's reproduction because milkweeds are the only plants that monarch butterfly caterpillars feed upon. So we want to plant these milkweeds where the monarch butterflies tend to reproduce, not where they tend to overwinter, because this could actually interfere with their life cycles and confuse them. So the other thing we don't want to do is plant non-native evergreen milkweeds, because non-native evergreen milkweeds that don't go dormant during the winter, because milkweeds here that are native go dormant during the winter, can carry this parasite that is lethal to the monarch butterfly. So plant native milkweeds if you are not within a couple miles of the coast, if you don't have a mild coastal climate. So if you're in the valley like us, fantastic place for native milkweed. How's that elderberry looking? Looks good. So yeah, unfortunately we have a bit of a noise situation here. Very common sometimes. We have trucks running by oftentimes. Airplanes. So you want to handle the mulching then, Anelli? So I'll demonstrate the mulching really quick. I'm almost done breaking up the soil here. We just want to create a layer of friable, decompacted topsoil. So this is a light surface tillage. So that's good to hear. Thank you, Deb. So good to hear, no pun intended. So now what we're going to do is out to the edge of the berms, we're going to apply mulch along the edges, because we don't want our wildflowers coming up right next to the shrubs. We want them coming up around the shrubs. So, and then in the center, and I would say leave an inch or two.
Okay.
To the base of the stem, just like so. And cover with a good couple inches of wood chips. In an ideal situation, you want 3 or 4 inches, but these are very small planting sites, so we may not be able to get that much. And I'll also make sure not to go too far out from the edge, because that will not leave enough room for us to plant our wildflowers. My, is that weed cloth already? But yeah, so all the mulch that we peeled back when we went to prepare the site for this planting can now be used to build these nests for the seedlings. So maybe even we could take some of this really rich decomposed stuff and sprinkle it around the plants. Native plants do not require fertilizer, at least when you get them into the ground. If you're propagating them, you're going to want to use some fertilizer, but not very much. So we're not going to fertilize at all. We're just going to put mulch around. The mulch will be the fertilizer as it decomposes. We don't need to worry about fertilizing. Native plants are very well adapted to acquiring nutrients from the soil that would not be available to many other plants. They're adapted to the very high pH alkaline soils that we find here in Southern California. So we don't really need to worry about fertilizing them. However, one thing that we do want to do is plant companion plants with them that would be considered pioneer plants in nature. And again, pioneer plants are plants that help to reestablish the ecosystem after a disturbance. So I'll describe what we're going to plant around here as well, a couple other small shrubs. In these spots that are marked right here with the stakes, we're going to plant this plant called Deerweed. So I'm going to take the camera over here and show you guys the Deerweed seeds. Deerweed, Apiana glaber, is not a very attractive plant. It's a very spindly looking shrub that grows to maybe about 2 or 3 feet tall. But it's very important to include in native plantings around here because it helps to replenish the nitrogen levels in the soil because it is a nitrogen fixer. So nitrogen fixers are crucial for the reestablishment of ecological health after a disturbance because they initiate the process of nitrogen cycling within the soil. And a lot of our more climax species that are characteristic of a mature ecosystem, such as our white sage and our elderberry, are going to need to have nitrogen cycling through the soil in order to be as healthy as they can be. You want to have a proper closed nitrogen loop, a proper nutrient cycle occurring. So we want to plant these pioneer plants, many of which are these nitrogen fixers. So for these, I did get local seeds. So we have Apiana glaber right here. The lighting is not good here. So this is our Apiana glaber, our Deerweed. Yes, fire. Fire, landslide. Fire and landslide are the two big ones in here. But also, since we have a civilization that really loves to disturb ecosystems, you know, development, you know, the clear cutting of land, oftentimes what they do around here in areas that are considered to be fire prone is they'll clear the perimeter around housing developments. And usually what tends to happen is you have even more flammable plants that are not native to California. These invasive annual plants get established in those regions. But you'll also see some of these guys come back. So for Apiana glaber, we have seeds. I'll show you guys what the seeds look like. So those of you who are familiar with nitrogen fixing plants might know that most of them are legumes. So legumes are our bean and pea family. These are actually, you can see, they're like kind of like little beans, little elongated beans. This plant right here, this Deerweed, is considered to be a fire follower. It requires sort of like the type of conditions you would find in a wildflower in order to break the seed dormancy and initiate the process of germination. So in this case, what we can do, usually, you know, either plants need to be exposed to heat, the seeds need to be exposed to heat, they need to be exposed to the chemicals found in smoke, or they need to be exposed to a combination of both. In this case, just heat will suffice. So what we're going to do before we direct sow these is we're going to place them in a cup of boiling water and allow them to soak for 24 to 48 hours. And this will break the tough seed coat because this tough seed coat is designed to resist biological and physical weathering until, you know, conditions are opportune for germination, which would usually mean after a fire. So we can simulate a wildfire by soaking the seeds, the heat of a wildfire, by soaking the seeds in boiling water. So all you want to do is boil the water. You want to pour it on top of the seeds. You know, maybe you want it to be a little bit under boiling temperature, perhaps 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you're going to leave it there for 24 to 48 hours. And this is going to damage the seed coat just enough so that these seeds can imbibe water and soak up water and begin the process of germination. So think of it this way, you know, like this is a small plant. This is 2 or 3 feet tall. It fixes nitrogen. So what this plant wants to do after it grows and establishes is it wants to produce a lot of seeds to reestablish the seed bank of this plant, so that there are plenty of these seeds in the soil when the next wildfire comes. And typically, you know, for coastal sage scrub, this is 15 to 30 years later. Not a couple years later like it is now, because we have too many wildfires. You know, fire is a part of the ecology in California. Fire is necessary to cleanse a lot of the to cleanse the plants of overgrowth, you know, to get rid of a lot of the overgrowth and return those nutrients back to the soil. But it's important that it happens in the proper interval. And when it does, you know, you'll have a seed bank that's been sitting and waiting of this plant and many similar plants that are fire followers that has been waiting for 15 to 30 years. And it is that fire, the heat and the chemicals from the smoke, that will help to trigger germination by physically degrading the seed coat from the heat, and also in many cases, not with this plant I believe, but it may help with this plant too, but the chemicals from the smoke will create will activate a hormonal response within the seed that will trigger germination. So you can also treat these seeds with fire, and there's a way to do that. We're not going to be doing that here and covering how to do that. It's a bit of a process, and also we're not going to be starting any fires here in the wellness garden. So I'm just going to take these home and treat them with hot water, and then we're going to sow them tomorrow. So, and that will suffice. Anyways, that's a bit about establishing seeds that you need to scarify. This method is called scarification. So you're scarring the seeds in preparation for germination to stimulate them. But some of them may not need it. So Telegraph Weed, for example, this is one that we threw into our native seed mix, which I'll show you guys in a moment. So our micro prairie mix. And Telegraph Weed is a very common roadside weed in California, but it's also native. So you'll see it growing along the sides of roads. It's about 3 feet high. You will have usually 2 or 3 stalks and then yellow flowers at the top. So Telegraph Weed is in the aster family, in the daisy family. So it's related to dandelions, and the seeds actually look a lot like dandelions. And I'll pull a couple of these out for here. So you don't need to treat these seeds, I believe. And I think these ones are more intended to germinate when you have some kind of mechanical disturbance to the soil. So landslides are also very common in Southern California, as we know. So I actually did clean these seeds, but they have the sort of feathery tops normally, like dandelions. And so think of it this way, you know, and I'm not sure if this particular plant is naturally adapted to germinating off of after a landslide, but I would think so, and here's why. So Telegraph Weed prefers to germinate and grow in situations where the soil was recently disturbed. Where is the soil disturbed typically in nature, mechanically? After a landslide, you have the during a landslide, the soil collapses and it loses its structure, and the lower soil horizons oftentimes end out on the top. So essentially, you have dirt that has been, you know, mechanically disturbed. So now what you have is you have plants that have these seeds that have those little tufts on them like dandelions, and this allows them to be dispersed far and wide from the wind. And plants like Telegraph Weed that grow like this will produce many, many, many seeds. And so the seeds get dispersed far and wide. They land on recently disturbed soils after being blown there by the wind, and then they germinate. So this one you pretty much can just sow in recently disturbed soil. That's one of the reasons why we're disturbing the soil, is to encourage plants like this to germinate, because a lot of these plants actually, you know, once they get established, these asters especially, they tend to partner up with a lot of the fungi that you find in soil, the mycorrhizal fungi, and these fungi are important for building soil structure. So plants like this will colonize sites that recently where the soil was recently disturbed mechanically, and then begin rebuilding that soil structure. So that's why we want to include this one in here. And this is a perennial plant. It'll live for a couple years, and then it'll die. And then it'll reseed itself. It'll probably spread a little bit around the area after it goes to seed, and some of the seeds will end up in the ground again, and if conditions are favorable once again, then they will germinate. So that's a bit about seeds. So how are we looking here? Looks good. So the elderberry's in. Just got to mulch. Yeah, so the holes that are not planted, don't worry about mulching them. We will do some direct sowing. There's another one that's very similar to the Telegraph Weed called gum plant, and we are going to be direct sowing that one today. So Grindelia, I think it's Grindelia, I don't remember the Great Valley gum plant. I don't remember the binomial name exactly, but I'm pretty sure it's Great Valley gum plant. So we'll be direct sowing that. And then also we have our scatter mixes, so the micro prairie mix. So here are our grasses. So we have our stipas, which are our needle grasses. These are some of the most important grasses that are native to California. They provide critical wildlife habitat and are very important for, again, regenerating a lot of the shrubland ecosystems that we find in California. And then we have June grass in here. I'm not very familiar with June grass, but it is a California native bunch grass as well. So a bunch grass is just a grant that sort of like grows in a mound. It like grows up from a central point and produces, multiple stalks. So think lemongrass. Lemongrass over here is a bunch grass. It's a tropical bunch grass. So we'll take a look at lemongrass to get an idea of how many of our native grasses grow. So you can see bunch grasses form these clumps. A very commonly used native bunch grass, it's Caltrans uses this one a lot actually. It's called deer grass, and this is a larger one. But a lot of these stipas are pretty small. These needle grasses, they'll get to about 2 feet tall at most, and they're fairly common. You can find them growing around, but the ecosystems that they used to inhabit, the California native bunchgrass ecosystems, have been roughly 99% eradicated, mostly by overgrazing, invasive species, development, that kind of stuff. So we have these native bunch grasses right here, and then we have our wildflowers. And this is just the the California native wildflower mix from SMS Seeds. There are many different kinds of native wildflowers, wildflower seed mixes that you can buy, and this is the Cool Season native grass mix from Theodore Payne Foundation. And you can buy these ones by the pound. So if you are trying to establish this kind of bunch grass micro prairie ecosystem in large sections of your yard, you can get these seeds by the pound. They are expensive, so expect to pay about $140 for a pound of these wildflower seeds, and about $40 for this one. So just keep that in mind. It is an expense, but it's well worth it. And once they get established, they will reseed every year, so you don't have to worry about purchasing more seeds ever again. And not only that, but you can collect seeds from your micro prairie if you want to expand it in the future. So, how are our nests looking? Caltrans uses the deer grass for erosion control. Bunch grasses are very, very, very good at erosion control. So another example of a plant that will reestablish readily after a landslide is a bunch grass, because again, the seeds are wind distributed, they hold together the soil really well, and they feed the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil that help to build soil structure. Everything in nature happens for a reason. Again, these systems have been designed, over the course of anywhere from a couple, like tens of thousands of years to millions of years to billions of years. So everything is logical in nature if you look deeply enough and you think hard enough about, what things do and what they're for. So, and that's what we're doing here. We're trying to think about, how would nature do this? How would nature establish 48 square feet of coastal sage scrub? And it's with these pioneer plants such as Deerweed and Telegraph Weed and gum plant, and with just these native grasses and wildflowers. And again, the wildflowers are important for building up the populations of pollinating insects, of insects that help to control the population of various pests, because these are going to be very necessary to have around once the shrubs begin to mature and begin to go to flower themselves. So I'm going to keep breaking this up right here. Let's get a better view. I realize the lighting is not great right now. Apologies for that. It's a bit tough this time of year. We're going to continue breaking this up. And actually, I can show you what to do in Nelly now that the rest of this is broken up. So just bear with me. And this part you kind of have to be careful with. So now that I've broken up a lot of the soil with the digging bar, we're going to use this cultivator right here. So I've got some mulch in it. And so what I like to do is go in the areas that I've broken up in between the nests and just go like that. And it's going to crush the clods of dirt and pulverize them into finer pieces. And this creates an ideal environment for a lot of these wildflowers and bunchgrass to germinate. And if you need to, you can use the other side too. If you feel like it's a bit more compacted, you can mix the soil around a bit and then just smooth it. And so that's what we want. We want it to be this consistency, maybe even a little finer.
Okay.
And so you guys can watch Anneli do that, and I'll go in with the digging bar and finish the job on the other side. We might decide to go over a little bit this time because this just is a bit of a process, but you know, after that we will call it after we sow in the wildflower seeds. Maybe in the future we can demonstrate direct sowing, seed scarification, that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in working with native seeds in particular as opposed to transplants, let us know, and maybe we can do a live stream about that as well. The season to plant native seeds extends all the way through January and February for the most part, and you could really start them at any time of year if you want, if you are able to provide the right conditions. But you know, ultimately, you know, we're in our peak planting season right now, and we will be for a couple more months. So just let us know, and we can do another live stream on germinating native seeds. Yeah, no problem, Deb. Have a good one. Looks great, Nelly.
Good.
So Anneli's getting the rest of the seeds that I brought today so that she can do this in her own yard or wherever she wants to do it. You can also make seed bombs out of wildflower and grass seeds, which is where you mix them into these balls with clay and compost, and then you can throw them wherever you want and they'll come up. I'm not sure if you want to use compost for California native seeds. A lot of people advise against that. I don't think there's that much of an issue with it as long as you have good compost personally. Because like a lot of native plant people, they seem to be really focused around the plants, and there isn't much conversations about, you know, and much known about really native soil biology in California. It's a lot of unknowns, and like, you know, a lot of our soil biology that we find in our gardens may be inappropriate for native plants and could cause them to get diseases. And that's why I think a lot of people are worried about compost in the native plant community. But, you know, I'm sure conceivably we can produce a kind of compost that works very well for native plant seeds. So that's something I intend on researching. But, you know, not a lot is known about that topic. All right, looks good. So I'm going to get another tool, and we're going to double up on this so we can get the seeds in. So if you're planting over a larger area, you can also use a rake. That's perfectly fine. You just have to be careful if you have all these planting nests that you've made. And the lighting is terrible right now. Yeah, it's just like that dappled sunlight is not great for this. But so yeah, I'm just gonna again take the rake. Maybe I should do it like this. Just kind of like. And with rakes, you kind of have to be more careful because it's easier to compact the soil with rakes. But you know, just find a way to use it that allows you to break up those clods. I think that tool's a lot better because that yours the stuff that you're doing looks a lot better. Is it still really compacted right there? Right there? Okay, I'll come in and get that for you. Let's see, where did I do my... Oh yeah. Right next to the nest, because that's where it was covered with the backfill from before. And I wasn't able to get that spot when I came in yesterday. Because I've already done this, you know, but it looks like there's also some like concrete down there. So like this is rough. Yeah, so we'll take that out. It's fine to leave rocks in your soil if you're planting native plants, but if you come across any big ones like that, take them out. That looks good back there. Any other spots that look to be a bit compacted? Right here.
Yeah, I'm sure I touched that.
So we'll come in and break this up again really quick. I'll just do it with my hands. I want to speed things up because we have to go to lab school after this. So okay, that looks good. Let's move the camera a bit so you can see what we're doing. And it's almost time for the seeds. Let's check the time. 11 o'clock. So yeah, we are over. So we're going to do the seeds really quickly. But we're almost done roughing up the soil, and then once we've done that, we can get the seeds in. So the other nests that are not ready yet, Nelly, let's avoid those ones. And then when we're done here, we'll refill those with water again. I'll go home, scarify the seeds that need to be scarified, and then I'll bring them tomorrow and put them in. Now, over here looks all good. So there were no more spots that had the shoot, really?
No, it was mostly that.
Yeah, we're all good here. This looks good. Maybe right here. And we just want to create that recently disturbed topsoil, that recently disturbed soil environment. It's the only time I advocate for tilling usually is when you're establishing something. So if you really wanted to be serious about it, you could probably use a rototiller. I would do that in a vegetable gardening situation. I don't know about native plants, but you know, rototillers will make this process very fast. That's for sure. I'll have to ask my native plant friends if they recommend using a rototiller for this. Because, you know, I do know a thing or two about native plants, but I'm no expert. I more know about, like, the native ecologies than native plants, I would say. Well, I mean, I do know about the native plants, you know. I should say not ecology, the botany, you know. Which plant is which, how to identify plants, you know, that kind of stuff. Where you find them. I'm kind of new to actually planting them. But I have done the wildflowers very successfully. And if you're just starting with native plants, do the wildflowers and bunch grasses. You will have the most luck with them. They're very easy. And when you're doing this, make sure the area is clear of weeds and weed seeds as well. You do not want weeds competing with your native flowers and grasses. That's a big no-no. It'll be a big headache for you if that happens. I have had it happen. So yeah, make sure that your area is free of weeds as well, as much as possible. Since this was covered by weed cloth for 5 years, I think we're good. We'll probably get some come up that get blown in by the wind, but as long as our native plants are in densely enough, they should eventually outcompete the weeds. Especially because we have a lot of perennials in here. A lot of our weeds that will get blown in are annuals, and in the long term, annual weeds cannot compete with perennial native plants. As long as the perennial native plants are cared for and kept in a healthy state. You know, one of the things that's really important about native plantings is that they need to be cared for, because it's really difficult to reestablish native plantings if the area has been previously overrun by invasive species. Since we're starting with a clean slate here, it should be pretty easy, but in another situation, it may not be. So just keep that in mind. Okay. So I'm going to start getting the seeds ready in a moment. That's probably good. You could probably go over here now. We want to finish this up pretty quickly. We don't want to rush, but we also don't want to take our time. So I'm going to go get our seeds. So I'm going to do the bunch grasses first. So the thing is, a lot of these native seeds prefer to be on the surface while they're germinating. They don't really like to be buried as much, especially the smaller seeds. Now the problem with that is, you want to be careful because you don't want these seeds to become very expensive bird food. I'm not sure exactly what the best method is yet, but what I've done in the past is lightly incorporate them, very, very lightly, so that they're just barely covered, so the birds kind of miss a lot of them, and then just water them in, and you're good to go. So I'm going to begin with the bunch grass seeds, distribute them as evenly as possible, even Stevens. So what I'll do usually is I'll do like a light smattering, just like a cover crop. I'll do a light smattering first of the native seeds, very light, around the area. I'll make sure I have some extras left, and then any areas that I feel did not get enough seed, we'll get the extras. Or any areas where I feel it's uneven. That way we get a nice even distribution of seeds, so we get a nice, beautiful, uniform micro prairie. And if there are any situations here where, it's more ideal for certain plants, if we have an even seed distribution, then whatever plant, there will be an even seed banks throughout the area. So whatever plants feel like they should germinate in a particular location and thrive in a particular location will come up in that and do the best in that location. So as you can see, I have some extras now. So I'm going to go in here and there and there, and maybe a little bit over here. And again, I'm going around the nests. Not on the nests, not in the nests, around the nests. We want all these to come up around the nests. So I do feel like I need a little bit extra. So I'll get a bit more. This is probably more densely than you need it, but that's okay because the birds will get some of them. Just keep that in mind, You're not just reestablishing the ecosystem, you're feeding the birds, so just get a few more, not too many. Nice and even. All right. Cool. So that's good for the grasses. So next we'll do the wildflowers. So once again, lots of small seeds. One thing that I find helps, I'll take a little bit at a time. One thing that can help as well is that you can bulk these up with compost and then sow them in with the compost. But I'm trying to do this once again as evenly as possible, and I'm probably going to run out. So it's tougher to do it with just the seeds alone. So if you have compost, use that. We don't have any compost right now. At least that I harvested. I wasn't able to get any today. Probably have some, but you can use compost, you can use sand, whatever. Most native plant people would probably recommend sand for this, but I'm trying to make sure that it's not patchy right now. And it will be a little patchy, you know, expect that, but it'll correct itself in the long run. But yeah, I would say, you know, use sand, use compost, whatever. Bulk it up. But yeah, I did end up with a couple extra, so we're gonna come back in there, get those in, like so. I think that's gonna be okay. All right. And if we need to reseed them in, if it's patchy, we can do that. So, yep, that's it. That's it for now. Our native ecosystem is getting established. Now we just have to water them in. We're gonna do the other nests with the seeds that are getting direct sown. And then this planting will be good to go. The wildflowers and grasses are going to fill in around the nests, and the nests will create a protected environment for all of our shrubs. So again, elderberry, narrowleaf milkweed, white sage, black sage, more of the milkweed, and then California buckwheat. We will also be doing deerweed, gum plant, and I'm also going to try and get some cobweb thistle and some monkey flower established. So it'll be a nice diverse native planting. Plenty of species, plenty of habitat for pollinators, for birds, you know, maybe even for some lizards. I've never seen lizards here, but you know, I've seen an alligator lizard. Maybe we'll have more alligator lizards show up. That'll be pretty cool. Anyways, so that's cool. Create habitat in your gardens. Plant native plants. Plant local native plants that are native to your area. Preserve the genetics of your local populations of native plants, like this. And not only that, plant native plants to support your vegetable garden by providing habitat to beneficial insects that keep the pests off your vegetables. Anyways, we're going to sign off for today.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
See you next week.
See you next week. We're going to be talking about composting, so stay tuned. Have a good one.